Hello, my name is Guido Schmidt-Traub from the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and I'm grateful for an opportunity to share some of our work in relation to monitoring and scenario tools for the sustainable bioeconomy. Our work is centered around the SDGs, and there's often a question of how these tools can contribute to the SDGs. We have analyzed this and have proposed 6 broad transformations that you see illustrated here, published in Nature Sustainability. And as you'll see, obviously, sustainable food, land, water, and oceans are at the center of achieving the goals, and they feed into many of the SDGs. Therefore, broad-based approaches are needed. The first of 3 efforts I want to sketch out here very briefly is the FABLE Consortium. FABLE stands for Food, Agriculture, Biodiversity, Land Use, and Energy Consortium. It comprises country teams here indicated in color, dark green and light green, from around the world, developed and developing countries. Essentially, most of the large emerging economies are part of this work. The purpose of FABLE is to support national teams in developing and applying integrated modeling framework to quantify long-term pathways towards sustainable land use and food systems. The work is led by local partners. They coordinate globally, as I mentioned, as I describe in a moment, to try to ensure that global sustainability targets like 1.5 degrees Celsius are met. FABLE has agreed on a 3-pillared framework. So when we talk about land use and food systems, we're looking at efficient and resilient agricultural systems, including, of course, the environmental dimensions. Second, conservation and restoration of biodiversity. And then third, the demand side, food security, healthy diets, also including, of course, food waste. All of this, because we're talking about competing land uses, needs to be integrated into land use and water use planning. And of course, because so many agricultural commodities are traded, there is a need for sustainable trade and supply chains that are consistent with these objectives. The bioeconomy, biofuels in particular, of course, enter this through several dimensions, particularly under Pillar 1. But of course, they can also have knock-on effects on Pillar 2 and on Pillar 3. The FABLE Consortium has country teams in the lead. Each of these devote quantitative effort towards identifying and harmonizing national data in the form of national databases. In parallel, the group has adopted and agreed on 7 broad global targets covering greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, land use, diets, nitrogen flows, water use, biodiversity, and other dimensions of sustainable land use and food systems, which the consortium wants to achieve at a global level. Every team, then highlighted here in the center of the slide, develops national pathways that use integrated models with a number of verification tools to ensure that the pathways from the different countries are broadly consistent and really to identify potential errors. A big focus of this work is to engage stakeholders, particularly at the national level. So there are extensive consultations around these pathways. And then we also aggregate up the results to see whether they add up to, for example, 1.5 degrees Celsius. And obviously, during the first iterations, they do not. So then country teams go back and revise their pathways. And this is an important mechanism for sharing lessons, raising the level of ambition, and really more broadly promoting learning across the country teams. There's also a mechanism to look at whether trade flows are consistent, because of course one strategy might be to externalize environmental pressures to, for example, import biofuels from other countries. And that of course needs to be checked across the country team. So we compare trade balances, and they often identify or lead to pretty major discrepancies in the initial iterations, which are then harmonized. A first report by the FABLE Consortium was published last year. It's available on the website, which I gave you earlier. And the second report is going to be published sometime in November. And we would encourage you to reach out to our local teams if you're interested in finding out more. The second effort briefly I want to describe is NatureMap. led by a consortium involving UNEP, WCMC, the World Conservation Monitoring Center, YASA, the SDSN, the International Institute for Sustainability in Rio, and Kew Gardens. The aim of Nature Map is to work with the broad scientific community on working on biodiversity, carbon, and ecosystem data that is spatially resolved, to develop a first harmonized global map of biodiversity at high resolution that includes a much broader range of strata than is typically available, and to integrate this this data with carbon and water. Here you see illustrated a first global map that identifies areas of priority in countries. This is a global prioritization effort. If one looks at the world from a biodiversity, carbon, and water provisioning services perspective, in this case, equally weighted. So the redder part of the map is the more significant the areas. You'll see that in addition to the usual biodiversity hotspots in the tropics, the northern parts of Canada and significant parts of Russia also light up, of course, because of the peat that's contained in the soils there. This is becoming quite widely seen and used as a decision support tool to help countries operationalize their targets spatially. This gives you the conservation perspective. We're also working with the Plangea platform on a restoration layer. So this is the restoration opportunity. And of course, these two will be combined. To give you a sense, colleagues in Argentina, the Fundación Bariloche, have started to apply these techniques using local data from Argentina. They have developed extensive and high-resolution biodiversity maps for carbon, water, and croplands, which are now integrated. And this gives you, at least in the case of Argentina, it appears to be the first truly integrated data set to support integrated land use planning. This is, of course, vital for understanding potential implications of enhanced investments in the bioeconomy. Argentina is, of course, potentially a significant producer of several biocrops. So this can be a useful tool also for your efforts. Let me close by just highlighting one more stream of work. This is with partners called Fixing the Business of Food. And here the question is to understand, what does this mean at a company, at a corporate level? We have, together with the Barilla Center for Nutrition, the Columbia Institute for Sustainable Investment, and the Santa Clara Lab at Siena University, developed a 4-pillar framework that very broadly just identifies the questions that companies should really be asking themselves in relation to the SDGs. Pillar 1 covers the question of how beneficial the products and services are that a company offers. Pillar 2 touches on the production processes. Pillar 3 covers the upstream and downstream supply chains. And then Pillar 4 critically also adds corporate citizenship, like does a company pay taxes? Does it respect labor laws, etc. to this? We're working this out in quite a lot of detail now for the food sector, so food and agriculture more broadly, and proposing an integrated indicator framework for these companies. A first proposal, partial still, was published in September. It's available on the website that you see here. And by May next year, so in time for the Food Systems Summit, we will publish a comprehensive indicator framework that, as far as we can tell, really will be the first attempt to really operationalize the SDGs seriously and consistently for the food sector. We're, of course, working with many other partners on this, like the World Benchmarking Alliance, the Science Based Targets Network, and others, and would, of course, also be very happy to engage with you. These are 3 efforts, so FABLE, Nature Map, and the Fixing the Business of Food consortium that I wanted to share briefly with you. I hope that's helpful. And I'm, of course, available via email and any other means to answer any questions, and would be delighted to explore opportunities for cooperation. Thank you very much, and I wish you a good rest of the discussion. Bye-bye.